Thank you for watching Scary Bear Attacks. If you like this episode, please remember to hit the like button and leave a comment or two, then subscribe and click on the bell to receive notifications of whenever we release new videos. Also, please remember to share them to your social media. Welcome back to Scary Bear Attacks. Today's episode takes us to the rugged and remote peaks of the Teton Wilderness of northwestern Wyoming. We visited this area in a previous episode, so if it seems familiar, it should. On the slopes of 10,258-foot-high Terrace Mountain is where our incident takes place, among pine and fir stands, with creeks lined with willow bushes. Yes, there are a lot of elk, moose, and mule deer roaming this area, but the most dangerous of its inhabitants are the grizzlies. On Thursday, September 13th, 2018, Wyoming outfitter Mark Upton was guiding a client of his, Corey Chubon, on an archery elk hunt. Corey had come up from Florida after booking his hunt with Martin Outfitters out of Moran, Wyoming, about 20 miles south of Yellowstone National Park. They'd seen a lot of promising sign in the area, and the rut was well underway. For those of you who may not be familiar with the term rut, it means the mating season for elk. During this time, the bulls bellow long, high-pitched screams that echo down valleys and across ridgetops for miles. The bulls use these calls, known as bugles, to locate each other, and rivals as well, and even assess the age and aggression of each other. Younger bulls will typically have higher and shorter bugles, while older bulls will sound raspier, and even have chuckles at the end that sound as if they're laughing at their rivals. Bulls can be called in by emitting a unique sound similar to what a female, or cow, elk will make. It is higher pitched, but more short in duration. Not only rival bulls use these bugles to locate each other, but hunters use them too, to find where the elk they are hunting are located. Elk hunters will mimic these mating calls with various devices to locate or even call in a lone bull seeking to challenge a herd bull for his harem of cows. In previous episodes on this channel, we've discussed brown bears learning to mimic the call of mating moose, and there's strong evidence that they also use elk bugles to home in on elk as well, though they're not known to mimic the bugles. On our episode on this channel called The Archery Elk Hunt Grizzly Ambush of Ronnie Leeming, we discussed this very behavior, and after you watch this episode, check that one out too. It takes place in this same area. Mark and his client, Corey Chubon, had found some luck when they located and stalked a beautiful 4x4 bull. This bull had a tall, ivory-tipped rack of points with 4 tines proudly jutting from each main beam, and Corey decided it was well worth his tag. The men crept upon the bull, and Corey's arrow hit pay dirt and seemed to pierce the bull's lungs. The men followed the blood trail for quite a while before twilight signaled closing time for the day of hunting. The men agreed to come back and resume following the blood trail in the morning. The following day was Friday, September 14th, and the hunters immediately scurried back to the blood trail to continue pursuing the wounded bull. In elk hunting, it isn't uncommon for a wounded bull or even a cow to run quite a distance after being shot. The conventional wisdom is to sit down for at least 30 minutes or so to let the animal bleed out. If you rush to follow the blood trail, you may end up bumping it from its bed, where it's bleeding, and force it to run to another location, which can lead to the animal getting lost, or even make it stop bleeding altogether due to the tissues around the wound shifting and closing off bleeding routes from the wound. The hunters' patience paid off, as after resuming where they left off, they found the bull dead just below a clearing. They carefully inspected the area around the dead bull and didn't see any sign of a bear visiting the carcass in the night, so they felt confident that they were not intruding on a bear food cache. Mark carried his bear spray on his hip in a holster as a precaution anyway, but it appeared they wouldn't need it. They wasted no time field dressing the bull and preparing the 220 pounds or so of meat for packing, and Mark carefully set his Glock pistol he carried on his hip a few yards above the carcass. To field dress an animal, a hunter takes a knife and cuts down the middle of the lower portion of the animal's body and through the layer of muscle into the gut. Through that opening, the organs and guts are removed, and other steps are taken to cool the meat to prevent bone sour or outright rot. The offal is usually left aside for scavengers to consume, but it can be an invitation for more than crows and coyotes. The men worked hard packing out the quarters of the elk's carcass and tying them up in a tree to cool. As it hung, the hunters returned to the remnants of the carcass to recover the hide and antlers. As the men surveyed the carcass and briefly considered the chore ahead, a thunderous racket of brush popping across the clearing above them drew their eyes up the hill. To their horror, a large grizzly bear was closing in on them at full speed, eyes fixed on them as she came. As she closed in on the men, she focused on Mark first. She tackled him to the ground as Corey fled uphill to grab the Glock on the backpack. As the bear wrestled Mark, Corey pointed the pistol at the bear and waited for a clear shot on the beast. When a good opportunity presented itself, he pulled the trigger, but the gun didn't fire. He fussed with it a bit and aimed again, but it still didn't fire. To anyone unfamiliar with a Glock pistol, they have 3 built-in safeties. The first is the drop safety, which keeps the firing pin from firing sequential rounds without a trigger pull. The firing pin safety, which mechanically blocks the firing pin from moving forward. And the trigger safety, which features a discrete lever incorporated into the trigger. Each of these mechanisms is countered by the pull of the trigger safety. The trigger safety must be depressed before the trigger is pulled, or the gun will not fire due to the redundancy of the other mechanical safeties designed into the pistol. It is an ingenious and very safe design feature, but to anyone unfamiliar with the proper discharge of the firearm, it may prevent them from shooting the pistol. The grizzly then turned her attention toward Corey. As she turned in his direction, Corey attempted to toss Upton the pistol. Unbeknownst to Corey and Upton, the pistol fell uselessly only a few feet down the hill and out of his range and awareness. The enraged sow knocked Corey to the ground and began to chew up and claw at his chest. As he kicked and punched at her, she clawed and bit his legs and arms as well. By now, Upton had made it back to his feet, which drew the sow's attention. She turned away from Corey and quickly began attacking Upton once again. This gave Corey a chance to run away. As he ran up the hill toward the racked-up horses, he looked back in Upton's direction. He could see Mark standing on his feet trying to fend off the sow's attack. Corey sprinted up the mountain and jumped on one of the horses. He urged the horse on to the ridgeline of the 10,000-foot-high terrace mountain. He pulled out his cell phone and surprisingly received a signal. Authorities immediately dispatched a rescue copter to pick him up. The rescue team flew the helicopter to the location of the carcass after Corey described where the incident occurred. They found the elk carcass around 7 p.m., and given there was only an hour or so of daylight and very little flight time left on the helicopter, decided to return at sunup on Saturday. When the rescue team returned to the location, they found a drag trail leading down the hill from the carcass. Believing it was from Upton's body, they followed it, only to find out that it was from the fall of the elk rolling down the hill. Near the elk carcass was a confusing scene indicative of a struggle. There was blood and debris obviously disturbed all around the immediate area, but some of that evidence was from the elk dying, the men gutting the animal, and from the struggle with the grizzly. The elk's blood trail crisscrossed with blood from the men, and it led to a moderate amount of confusion. It took a while for all the evidence to make sense, but the rescue team eventually found Upton's body 50 yards uphill from the carcass. Due to the fact that there was no drag trail up to where they found Upton's body, the team concluded that he was still able to walk about 50 yards up the hill after the initial attack, and found his way there for the fatal second attack from the sow. Judging by the fatal wounds on Upton's body, the investigator concluded that his death at the second attack site was very quick. The sow, or her 1.5-year-old cub, had bitten Upton's head, which caused his immediate death. His body had severe trauma inflicted upon it during the 2 attacks, but the bears left his body intact. They did not eat any part of Mark Upton's body. The empty can of bear spray Upton carried on his hip was found near his body. His Glock pistol was located downhill from Upton's final location, but uphill from the elk carcass and initial attack scene. Given its final location, it appeared that Upton somehow recovered the pistol, only to lose it somehow in his uphill climb toward the location of the final attack. Shortly after finding Upton's remains, Wyoming Game and Fish carnivore biologists placed 3 leg-hold snares around the attack site. By Sunday morning, the investigative team landed a helicopter. As soon as they walked a short distance, they could hear the bawling of a bear caught in one of the foothold traps. They knew by the sound that they had snared the cub, which would mean the sow may be nearby and in a less than cordial mood after listening to her youngster holler. In an attempt to observe the snared cub safely, the investigative team tried to approach from an open angle with less cover. Given that grizzly sows are extremely protective, she was waiting up for them and heard them approaching her snared cub. She didn't hesitate to charge the 5 well-armed men. But when she could finally see how many people there were, she paused for a brief moment. The team took the opportunity to quickly discuss if they should shoot her or not. The decision was made by Officer Dan Thompson to take her. The 4 armed men in the group fired numerous rounds, dropping the protective sow in her tracks. The officers began their investigation of her and found her stomach to be full of elk meat. Her paws matched the tracks at the elk carcass, and the smell of bear spray could be seen and felt only a short distance from her. The team figured out that the bear spray Upton carried on his hip was not discharged in the initial attack, most likely due to how quickly it happened. They determined that the bear spray was deployed by Upton at the second attack site, where he received the fatal injuries that took his life. They collected her DNA to submit to the lab for analysis back in Laramie. After analysis of the 10-year-old, 250-pound sow, she was found to be very healthy with no apparent injuries or impairments. She had plenty of fat on her and was described as being in good shape. The cub was about 150 pounds and was sedated before being removed from the snare. Officer Thompson again made the call to kill the cub. It would later be revealed in Upton's autopsy that the cub had participated in killing him. Officer Thompson later said that the yearling cub was involved in the attack and contributed to the death of Mark Upton. He also stated that he had never dealt with a sow and a yearling cub attacking in this manner. He commented as well that the investigators could not agree with the idea that Upton discharging his bear spray during the second attack did no good. An important point that the state biologist pointed out was that the bears were not returning to a kill. They were not acting in defense of a carcass they were claiming. They also point out that the cub was a safe distance away from the men and was not in any danger nor being threatened by them. Nonetheless, the sow charged the men and attacked without hesitation. This is beyond rare behavior and very unusual. Officer Thompson said that the hunters were doing nothing wrong in their recovery of the elk carcass. They followed the best practices for hunting in grizzly country. He also indicated that killing the cub was the right thing to do because the sow had taught him that killing humans is a potential way to get food. Bears have remarkable memories when it comes to how they acquire food, and a cub who is shown any lesson will retain and use it in the future. Wyoming Game and Fish officials did not try to capture nor kill those bears, simply because their behavior didn't warrant it. They acknowledge that this type of bear behavior is something that cannot be ignored in this environment. Back to scary bear attacks. Today's episode takes us to a private campsite just north of Grand Lake and west of Rocky Mountain National Park in north-central Colorado. The valley floor is over 8,000 feet in elevation, but the gorgeous granite peaks around it tower to over 11,000 feet high. Not only the mountains are tall here, as the forests of lodgepole pine, Douglas fir, and bristlecone pine reveal their majesty. The oldest living tree in the world is 4,800 years old and is of the bristlecone pine species. The animals that frequent this area are moose, mule deer, elk, and bighorn sheep. The dominant predator of the area is the black bear. It is in this scenic and rugged backdrop that our episode takes place today. On Sunday, July 25, 1971, 31-year-old John Richardson of Denver, Colorado was camping with his fiancée, Linda Moore, and his brother-in-law, G.H. Waddell, at Holsworth Ranch. Moore and Richardson were set to tie the knot on the coming Saturday, looking forward to making a life together as husband and wife. Moore had recently received her doctorate degree from UCLA earlier this year at only 27 years of age. Mr. Waddell with his wife and 3 kids were staying in their RV, and Richardson and Moore were camping in their own separate tents alongside their family. The scenery and company were an amazing background for the engaged couple to bid their last week as singles farewell and enjoy some time in the woods together. After dinner time and fun moments around the campfire, the campers began to wind down for the night. The Waddells began the nightly ritual of getting the kids into bed, as Richardson and Moore crawled into their sleeping bags for a peaceful night's rest beneath the soothing blanket of stars laid out above them. Unbeknownst to the campers, a hungry black bear was lurking in the darkness. The aroma of their meal still hung in the air, wafting its way into its nostrils, beckoning it forward to what might be an easy meal. In the 1970s, it wasn't uncommon for visitors to forests to feed bears, as they were found in parks or near campgrounds. This behavior conditioned bears to identify people as a food source, indirectly, but not always indirectly. The bear stealthily crept through the night, padding up to near Richardson's tent. For some reason it was drawn to his tent, and there is no source that indicated whether he had food inside his tent or not, but he was nonetheless seen as a food source. Sources indicate that Richardson may have heard the bear nearby and emerged from his tent to investigate, but since he was alone at the time, there is no way to confirm this. At any rate, once he exited his tent, the bear attacked him. It bit him by the neck and shook its head back and forth, taking him to the ground in the process. Richardson fought back as best he could and yelled in terror for help as the bear was unrelenting in its attack on him. Moore heard his cries for help and was first to respond to them. She rushed out of her tent and yelled at the bear, trying to frighten it off. While she tried to rescue her beloved fiancé, the bear chased her and bit her on the back, leaving Richardson bleeding on the ground. At this point, Mr. Waddell roared from the RV, brandishing a frying pan, as if it were a broadsword. Waddell struck the bear about the face numerous times with such ferocity that the bear turned and fled into the forest. It was then that Waddell and Moore turned their attention to Richardson. The bear had severely lacerated his throat, from which his blood gushed quickly. His life ebbed as they tried life-saving first aid. The authorities were quickly notified, and a search for the bear was underway. A professional hunter was brought in and tracked the bear using hounds. They relentlessly followed the bear as it covered several miles, trying to elude its pursuers. After catching up with the black bear, they dispatched it and ended its predatory death campaign. Upon examining the bear, it was found to be of average size and health for bears in the area, weighing in at a healthy 200 to 230 pounds. There's no mention of the sex or age of the bear, nor if there were cubs present. Frequently, these kinds of attacks are from younger male bears who are just learning the boundaries between their world and the human world. Black bear attacks in Colorado have occurred on rare occasion, but the attack on Richardson was the first fatal bear attack in recent history, but it wouldn't be the last. We've discussed bear attacks in Colorado on this channel before, but they frequently happened after a human was providing food to the bear, as in the Donna Munson episode. That episode is interesting and worth a look if you have time. But in the episode on the young lumberjack Colin McClellan, in this episode, there's a component of predation and perhaps territorial defense. After reviewing the facts surrounding this attack, I'm left with a few questions. Do you think the attack on Richardson was a predatory attack or a defensive attack? The defensive attack possibility has validity in that once he emerged from his tent, he may have surprised the bear. Do you think the bear may have been habituated to find food at campsites? Do you think a frying pan is a better bear deterrent than bear spray? Would you have the courage of Moore and Waddell to physically confront a bear while it was attacking one of your loved ones? I look forward to reading your thoughts, so please post them in the comments section below and let's talk about it. My parting comment is that I've skinned brown bears in Alaska, and once their hide is removed, it is apparent that their design hinges around two deadly actions. A bear's head is a big ball of muscle, and it looks like every one of those muscles ties into their jaws. As for their forearms, they are massive, with dense bone and muscle forming something similar to a mace from medieval days, crowned with 5 sharp claws. I still have 3 brown bear claws that I sometimes take out and press against my skin to remind myself how easily they pierce frail human flesh, and that is with the controlled pressure of a man. Welcome back to Scary Bear Attacks. Today's episode takes us to the splendor of Jasper National Park in central Alberta, Canada. The town of Jasper sits at about 3,500 feet in elevation, but the granite peaks all around it climb to about 8,500 feet in elevation. The broad, rounded valleys, shaped by millennia of glacial activity, are packed full of dense stands of lodgepole pine and Doug fir, interrupted with stands of quaking aspen, balsam poplar, black cottonwood, white spruce, and white birch. Common plant eaters you might see are whitetail and mule deer, elk, moose, and woodland caribou. Bighorn sheep and mountain goats defy gravity on the vertical aspects of the area, and the predators of the area are black and brown bears, cougars, foxes, coyotes, wolves, and lynx. In the area surrounding Patricia Lake and along a trail system near Cottonwood Slough is a favorite and frequently visited trail. This trail system is adjacent to town and is a very convenient place for exercise and recreation for locals and visitors alike. On the evening of Saturday, May 24th, 2014, a 25-year-old man, Etienne Cardinal, was riding his mountain bike down the trails, venting some of his youthful energy in the fresh air. He was a seasonal employee as a Parks Canada conflict specialist. He's a local and knew better than to go outside without packing his bear spray. He safely packed it into the holster on the side of his backpack and headed for the door. No source I could find indicated he carried or even owned a firearm. Etienne was only about 10 minutes from safely returning to town from his ride when an enormous roar interrupted the tranquility. He immediately knew it was a bear and that it was very close. So close, he wasn't sure where it was at first. Etienne glanced up from the trail just in time to see a huge brown bear turning toward him just off of the trail only a few feet. There was no time to take evasive action, nor try to avoid the attack. The bear quickly spun and swatted him with its massive paw on his back. The impact of the paw swipe sent him spilling onto the trail. After hitting the ground, Etienne rolled quickly to his knees and covered his head and neck with his arms and began to yell loudly in terror. As he braced for another impact from the paws, he could feel the angry bear pounce on him and begin to bite at his backpack. The only thing he could do was protect his head and neck and scream at the top of his lungs, hoping this would scare the bear away, cutting short the clearly defensive attack. As Etienne covered up on the ground, he could feel it pull at his backpack. Then suddenly it stopped. He looked around to see what the bear was doing, and as he looked up, all he could see was it scampering away quickly. His initial confusion soon gave way to understanding as the contents of his bear spray began filtering into his eyes and nose. He suddenly became aware that as the bear was biting into his backpack, it had found his bear spray container with its teeth and punctured it. The majority of the contents of the can sprayed directly into the bear's mouth and likely right into its lungs. Etienne quickly pulled out a cell phone from his backpack and called for emergency medical help. He knew the bear had raked him on his back with its claws during the initial attack and didn't feel any other wounds. He was quickly rushed to the hospital and his minor injuries were treated. He was released the same day. Park officials completed a search of the area for the bear, but found neither hide nor hair of the bear, but closed the trail system for a week as a precaution. Officials stated that Etienne did everything right and that the occurrence was just bad timing. They believed the bear didn't hear him as he approached and was startled into defending itself. I'm sure we can all agree that Etienne is fortunate, but this incident reveals some very interesting possibilities. Do you think that a bear spray suit is a good idea? The suit could be set up with a few cans of bear spray, and once they're disturbed, would immediately spray their contents in full measure. What is the risk of such a device? Do you think it would stop defensive bear attacks? We know that bear spray has a 90% effective rating, so what about the other 10% of the attacks? Would you be willing to purchase such a device to decrease your odds or injury of death from a bear attack? Thank you for watching Scary Bear Attacks. If you've enjoyed this episode, please consider clicking on the like button and clicking on the bell icon. We'll help you know when we post our new episodes. Posting our video links to your social media profiles furthers awareness, and it's fun. We slashed our prices in our merch store, linked below, so check out the bargains there while you shop. As a member of our human community, remember to adventure bravely and be careful out there, especially in bear country.